A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat cost $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? If you said 10 cents, you were wrong, and you were in very good company. More than half the students at Harvard, MIT, and Princeton gave that exact same wrong answer. The correct answer is 5 cents. Take a second, do the math. If the ball costs 5 cents and the bat costs $1 more, that is $1.05. Add the 5-cent ball and you get $1.10. It works, but here is what is truly fascinating. That is not what just happened inside your head. An answer appeared instantly, effortlessly. It felt right. It felt obvious, and you almost certainly did not check it. That confident, automatic, and completely wrong intuition is the subject of one of the most important psychology books ever written. Daniel Kahneman spent over 40 years studying these invisible shortcuts in your thinking. He won the Nobel Prize for it, and what he discovered will change the way you understand your own mind. This is thinking fast and slow. Daniel Kahneman is an Israeli-American psychologist who did something almost unheard of. He won the Nobel Prize in economics without ever taking an economics course. He earned it for work he did with his closest collaborator, a brilliant mathematician and psychologist named Amos Tversky. The two men met in the late 1960s at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and quickly discovered that they shared something unusual. They were both fascinated by the mistakes people make when they try to think clearly. For the next 14 years, they spent nearly every working day together, arguing, inventing questions, testing their own intuitions against each other, often during long walks through the quiet streets of Jerusalem. The work they produced during those years revolutionized how we understand the human mind. It changed psychology, economics, medicine, law, and public policy. Kahneman later said it was the best work either of them ever did. This book is not about stupidity. It is not a catalog of human foolishness designed to make you feel bad about yourself. It is something much more interesting than that. It is a map of the invisible machinery inside your head. Machinery that is extraordinarily powerful, remarkably efficient, and deeply structurally flawed in ways that no amount of intelligence can fully overcome. Over the next hour, I will walk you through every key idea in this extraordinary book. You will learn why your brain takes shortcuts that feel brilliant but are often dangerously wrong. You will discover the hidden forces that shape your beliefs, your fears, your confidence, and your choices, forces so subtle that you rarely notice they exist. And by the end, you will have a vocabulary for something most people go their entire lives without understanding: how your own mind actually works. Let us begin with a question that sounds simple, but turns out to be anything but. How many minds do you have? Chapter 1. The two characters in your head. Imagine you are scrolling through your phone and you see a photograph of a woman's face. Her eyes are wide, her brows are pulled together, her mouth is tight. In less than a second, before you have formed a single conscious thought, you know she is furious. You know she is about to say something harsh. You might even feel a tiny surge of tension in your own chest, as if her anger has jumped off the screen and into your body. You did not choose to read her expression. You did not sit down and analyze the angle of her eyebrows or the width of her pupils. It just happened, instantly, automatically, without effort. Now try this. 17 times 24. Feel the difference? Your experience just changed completely. You went from effortless recognition to deliberate, grinding mental work. Your pupils dilated slightly. Your heart rate ticked up. You had to hold numbers in your head, retrieve a procedure you learned in school, and execute it step by step. If someone had asked you a question while you were halfway through that multiplication, you might not have even heard them. Daniel Kahneman uses these two experiences, the instant reading of an angry face and the painful slog of mental arithmetic, to introduce the central idea of his life's work. Your mind operates in two fundamentally different modes: He calls them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast. It is effortless. It runs constantly, whether you want it to or not. It reads faces, understands language, detects danger, completes the phrase bread and with the word butter. It is the part of your mind that drives a car on an empty road while you daydream about dinner. It makes you flinch when a ball flies towards your face. System 1 is automatic, and it is astonishingly powerful. System 2 is something else entirely. It is slow, it is deliberate, it requires concentration. System 2 is the part of you that counts the occurrences of the letter A on a page of text, that compares two washing machines for overall value, that files your taxes or parks a car in a tight space. System 2 is what you think of as you, the conscious, reasoning self that makes decisions. But here is the first big surprise. You think System 2 runs the show. You believe that your conscious, rational mind is in charge, carefully weighing evidence, making smart choices, directing your life. It is not. Most of the time, System 2 is barely paying attention. It sits in the background, cruising at low power, while System 1 generates a continuous stream of impressions, feelings, intuitions, and impulses. When System 1 produces a suggestion, that person looks trustworthy, this investment feels right, 10 cents, System 2 usually glances at it, shrugs, and signs off. Think about it. When was the last time you truly stopped to question a gut feeling? Not to override it with some other gut feeling, but to actually slow down, pull apart the logic, and check whether your instinct had any basis in reality? If you are like most people, the honest answer is almost never. This is not because you are lazy in any ordinary sense. It is because System 2 has a design flaw. It has limited capacity. Paying attention to one thing means you cannot pay attention to something else. And effortful thinking is genuinely costly. It burns glucose, it creates strain, and your brain is wired by millions of years of evolution to avoid unnecessary effort. Kahneman describes a stunning demonstration of just how limited System 2 really is. Psychologists Christopher Chabris and Daniel Kahneman created a short film of two teams passing basketballs, one team in white shirts, the other in black. Viewers were told to count the number of passes made by the white team and to ignore the black players. The task is hard. It demands complete focus. Halfway through the video, a woman in a gorilla suit walks into the middle of the frame. She stops, turns to face the camera, thumps her chest, and walks off. She is visible for 9 full seconds. Half the viewers did not see her. They were so consumed by the counting task, so absorbed in directing their limited System 2 resources at the basketballs, that a woman in a gorilla suit thumping her chest in the middle of the screen was completely invisible to them. And when they were told about the gorilla afterward, they refused to believe it. They were sure it was not there. Kahneman says this experiment reveals two essential facts about how our minds work. First, we can be blind to the obvious. And second, perhaps more importantly, we are blind to our blindness. We do not know what we are missing, and we do not know that we do not know. So if System 2 is this limited, this distractible, this easy to overwhelm, what does that mean for System 1, which is running constantly without any supervision? It means System 1 is not just a helper. It is the silent author of most of your life. It generates the impressions that become your beliefs. It produces the impulses that become your actions. It constructs stories, detects patterns, and assigns meaning to everything around you, all before your conscious mind has even opened its eyes. And most of the time, it does a remarkable job. System 1 is the reason you can read these words without sounding out each letter. It is the reason you can drive to work without consciously thinking about every turn. It is the reason a mother can detect the faintest shift in her child's tone of voice and know immediately that something is wrong. But System 1 has flaws. Deep structural flaws that are built into its architecture. It jumps to conclusions. It sees patterns where none exist. It answers questions it was never asked. It confuses easy to imagine with likely to happen. And it does all of this with absolute confidence. Kahneman illustrates this with one of the oldest optical illusions in psychology. Imagine two horizontal lines on a page, one above the other, each the exact same length. The only difference is the fins attached to their ends. One line has fins that angle outward, like an open arrowhead, and the other has fins that angle inward. You already know which one looks longer. The line with the inward-pointing fins appears visibly shorter, even though both lines are identical. This is the Muller-Lyer illusion, and it has been studied for over a century. Here is what makes it relevant to everything we are discussing. Even after you measure the lines, even after you confirm they are the same length, even after you know the illusion and understand exactly how it works, you still see one line as longer than the other. The illusion does not go away. And this is Kahneman's sobering message about cognitive illusions, the mental version of optical illusions. Knowing about them does not make them disappear. You cannot simply decide to stop being anchored, or to stop being swayed by vivid stories, or to stop judging people by first impressions. System 1 generates these impressions automatically. You cannot turn it off. The best you can do, and this is the realistic promise of this book, is to learn to recognize the situations where your intuitions are most likely to be wrong, to develop an inner alarm that goes off when the stakes are high and the conditions favor error, not to eliminate the mistakes, but to catch the important ones before they cost you something you cannot afford to lose. But before we get to the specific errors, we need to understand something even more fundamental. System 2, the one you trust, the one you identify with, has a dirty secret. It is spectacularly lazy. Chapter 2, the lazy controller. Let us go back to the bat and the ball. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? When the psychologist Shane Frederick gave this problem to thousands of university students, the results were remarkable. At Harvard, MIT, and Princeton, three of the most selective universities on Earth, more than 50% of students gave the wrong answer. At less selective schools, the failure rate climbed above 80%. Now, these are not unintelligent people. Every single one of them could solve this problem if they slowed down and did the algebra. The math is not hard. What is hard, apparently, is resisting the first answer that pops into your head. And this is Kahneman's point. The bat and ball problem is not a test of math ability. It is a test of something far more important: your willingness to question yourself. When a plausible answer arrives quickly and effortlessly, do you accept it and move on? Or do you pause, feel the slight discomfort of uncertainty, and invest the effort to check? Most people accept. Most people move on. And Kahneman has a word for this. He calls it the laziness of System 2. This laziness is not a character flaw. It is a design feature. Your brain runs on roughly 20 watts of power, less than the light in your refrigerator. Maintaining even basic consciousness is expensive. Effortful thinking, the kind that requires you to hold multiple ideas in your head simultaneously, override your first impulse, and follow a chain of logic step by step, is the mental equivalent of sprinting. You can do it, but not for long, and not without cost. Kahneman spent an early part of his career measuring that cost in the most literal way possible. Working with a colleague named Jackson Beatty, he discovered that the pupils of your eyes dilate when you are thinking hard. Not a little, measurably. They could sit in a corridor, watch a projected image of a subject's pupil on a screen, and tell the exact moment the person gave up on a difficult mental task. The pupil would contract, and they would say from down the hall, "Why did you stop working just now?" The subject would look stunned. "How did you know?" But here is where things get truly interesting. What happens to the rest of your mind when System 2 is working at full capacity? Picture this experiment. You are asked to memorize a 7-digit number. While holding those digits in your head, Someone offers you a choice between two desserts, a sinful slice of chocolate cake or a virtuous bowl of fruit salad. When your system 2 is loaded down with those 7 digits, you are significantly more likely to choose the chocolate cake. Your ability to resist temptation is diminished because the mental resources you would normally use for self-control are occupied elsewhere. System 1, with its preference for immediate gratification, takes over. It has a sweet tooth, and when System 2 is busy, nobody is watching the store. This is not a trivial finding. It means that cognitive effort and self-control draw from the same limited pool of mental energy. When you are mentally exhausted, you do not just think worse, you behave worse. You make more impulsive purchases. You are more likely to use offensive language. You give up on difficult tasks sooner. You reach for the easiest available option instead of the best one. The psychologist Roy Baumeister demonstrated this with a cruel but elegant experiment. He brought subjects into a room filled with the aroma of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. On the table sat a bowl of the cookies and a bowl of radishes. One group was told to eat only the cookies. The other group, and you have to feel for these people, was told to eat only the radishes while sitting inches from warm chocolate chip cookies. Afterward, both groups were given a difficult puzzle to solve. The puzzle was actually impossible, but the researchers wanted to see how long each group would persist before giving up. The radish eaters quit after 8 minutes. The cookie eaters lasted 19. The effort of resisting temptation had drained the radish group's capacity for persistence. Baumeister called this phenomenon ego depletion, the idea that willpower is a finite resource that gets used up. Think about what this means for your daily life. Every act of self-control, resisting a snack, suppressing an emotion, forcing yourself to be polite to someone who irritates you, staying focused on a boring report, draws from the same tank. By the end of a long day full of difficult decisions and small acts of restraint, that tank is running low. And when it runs low, System 2 effectively goes off duty. Does this actually affect real decisions that matter? Decisions that change people's lives? Consider a study published in one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. Researchers examined the decisions of 8 parole judges in Israel over many months. These judges spend their days reviewing applications for parole, case after case, 6 minutes each, all day long. The default decision is to deny parole. Only about 35% of applications are approved, but the researchers noticed something disturbing. After each of the judges' 3 daily food breaks, morning, lunch, and afternoon, the approval rate spiked to roughly 65%. Then it steadily declined over the next 2 hours, dropping all the way down to nearly 0 just before the next meal. Think about what that means. A prisoner's freedom, the single most consequential decision of their life, was predicted not by the facts of their case, but by the time of day, not by the quality of their lawyer's argument, but by whether the judge had eaten lunch. Tired and hungry judges fall back on the easier default option, which is to deny parole, making the effortful decision, carefully weighing the evidence, imagining the consequences, accepting the responsibility of releasing someone, requires mental energy that has been depleted. So System 2 surrenders and the default wins. The bat and ball problem catches smart people being intellectually lazy. The parole judges show us something darker, that System 2's laziness can have devastating real-world consequences. And the most unsettling part is that none of these judges knew it was happening. They believed they were making thoughtful, rational decisions. They had no idea that their pupils had contracted, that their mental resources had been drained, and that their System 2 had quietly checked out. This is the fundamental tension at the heart of Kahneman's work. System 1 is always on, always confident, and often wrong. System 2 can catch the errors, but only if it is paying attention, and it is paying attention far less often than you think. Chapter 3. The machine behind the curtain. Have you ever noticed that when someone says the word vomit, something happens inside your body? Not a thought, a physical reaction? Kahneman opens one of his most fascinating chapters by placing two words on a page, one above the other. Bananas, vomit. In the space of about 1 second, a remarkable chain of events unfolded in your mind. You experienced a flash of disgust. Your face may have twisted slightly. Your heart rate increased. The hair on your arms may have risen. You automatically imagined a story. Perhaps someone ate a banana and became ill. Your brain connected those two words, invented a cause and effect narrative, and triggered a miniature physical reaction, all without you doing anything, all without you choosing to do anything. This is what Kahneman calls the associative machine, and it is the engine that drives System 1. Your mind is not a filing cabinet where ideas sit quietly in separate folders. It is a vast, interconnected web where every concept is linked to thousands of others through meaning, through emotion, through memory, through physical sensation. Activate one node in that web, and energy ripples outward in every direction, lighting up related ideas, stirring emotions, and even changing how your body behaves. And this leads to one of the most startling discoveries in modern psychology, a discovery that most people, even after hearing the evidence, refuse to believe about themselves. Your actions, your physical, real-world actions, can be invisibly controlled by ideas you are not even aware you have been exposed to. In a now famous experiment at New York University, the psychologist John Bargh asked a group of college students, most of them 18 to 22 years old, to assemble sentences from scrambled sets of words. For one group, half of the scrambled sentences contained words associated with being elderly. Words like Florida, forgetful, bald, gray, wrinkle. When the students finished the task, they were sent down a hallway to a second experiment. But the hallway was the experiment. Researchers were secretly timing how long it took each student to walk from one end of the corridor to the other. The students who had been working with the elderly-themed words walked significantly more slowly. They had no idea. When asked afterward, none of them noticed that the words shared a theme. None believed that anything about the first task could have influenced their behavior. The word old had never even appeared, but their System 1 had connected the scattered words, constructed the concept of old age, and then, without any conscious involvement, translated that concept into a physical behavior. Their legs move differently because of words on a page, and it works in reverse. When researchers in Germany asked students to walk around a room at 1/3 of their normal pace for 5 minutes, essentially forcing them to move like elderly people, those students were subsequently faster at recognizing words related to old age. Slow walking primed the concept of being old, just as old age words had primed slow walking. Kahneman calls this the ideomotor effect. The idea primes the motor action, and the motor action primes the idea. Your mind and your body are not separate departments. They are a single looping system in which thoughts become movements, and movements become thoughts. Now, this might feel like a clever laboratory trick, something that works on college students who are not paying attention, but the priming effects Kahneman describes reach much further than a hallway. Consider what happened in a university office kitchen in England. For years, the staff had operated on the honor system. They helped themselves to tea and coffee throughout the day and dropped money into an honesty box to cover the cost. A price list was posted on the wall. One day, a small poster appeared just above the price list. Some weeks, it showed a picture of flowers. Other weeks, it showed a pair of eyes, just eyes, staring directly at whoever stood in front of the coffee. Nobody commented on the poster. Nobody said a word, but the contributions changed dramatically. During the weeks when the eyes were watching, people paid nearly 3 times as much as they did during the flower weeks. A picture of eyes, not real eyes, not a surveillance camera, not a person standing there judging you. A photograph of eyes on a piece of paper was enough to activate the feeling of being observed, which triggered more honest behavior. System 1 does not distinguish very well between a symbol of being watched and actually being watched. The representation is real enough, but priming does not only change our behavior, it changes something even more fundamental. It changes what we believe is true. Here is a finding that should trouble anyone who cares about truth. A reliable way to make people believe a statement is to repeat it, not to prove it, not to provide evidence, simply to say it again. The psychologist Robert Zajon spent years studying what he called the mere exposure effect, the finding that the more often you encounter something, the more you tend to like it. He demonstrated this with Turkish words that meant nothing to American students. He printed them in university newspapers at varying frequencies. Some appeared once, others 25 times. When he later asked people whether each word seemed to mean something good or something bad, the words that had appeared more frequently were rated as much more positive. The mechanism is cognitive ease. When something feels familiar, when it flows through your mind without friction, System 1 interprets that smoothness as a signal that everything is fine, that the thing you are looking at is safe, that the statement you are reading is probably true. Familiarity and truth become tangled together, and System 2 rarely bothers to pull them apart. This is why authoritarian regimes use propaganda, not because a single lie is convincing, but because a lie repeated 1,000 times starts to feel like common knowledge. This is why advertisements work even when you think you are immune to them. This is why a phrase like the body temperature of a chicken, which is utterly meaningless as evidence, makes people more likely to believe that the body temperature of a chicken is 144 degrees. The familiarity of the phrase bleeds into the familiarity of the claim. Kahneman's picture of System 1 is now becoming clear, and it is both awe-inspiring and alarming. This machine inside your head runs constantly, automatically, and without your permission. It primes your behavior with ideas you did not notice. It makes you like things simply because you have seen them before. It tells you something is true because it feels easy to think about. And it does all of this with such quiet efficiency that System 2, the part of you that could catch the error, has no reason to suspect anything is wrong. You are, as the psychologist Timothy Wilson put it, a stranger to yourself. You are being guided through your life by a system you did not design, cannot turn off, and are barely aware exists. So what happens when this powerful, invisible machine encounters a question it cannot answer? It answers a different one instead. Chapter 4. Jumping to conclusions. Imagine a woman named Joan walks into a party. You chat with her for 5 minutes. She is warm. She laughs easily. She asks you questions about yourself and seems to actually listen to the answers. You come away thinking she is a genuinely nice person. A week later, someone asks you whether Joan might contribute to a charity. What do you think? Would she be generous? The honest answer is that you have absolutely no idea. You spoke with her for 5 minutes at a party. You know nothing about her financial situation, her values, her giving history, or her feelings about charity. There is zero evidence connecting a pleasant personality at a cocktail party to charitable generosity, but you already have a feeling, do you not? You probably feel that yes, Joan would be generous. She was so warm and likable. Of course she would help. What just happened is one of the most pervasive errors in human judgment. Kahneman calls it the halo effect. When you like one thing about a person, that positive feeling spills over into everything else you believe about them. Joan is friendly, so she must also be generous, intelligent, and hardworking. A politician with a strong jaw and a confident voice must be competent. A company with a beautiful website must make a quality product. The halo works in the other direction too. If your first impression of someone is negative, maybe they seem awkward or cold, that impression will contaminate everything that follows. Every ambiguous piece of information gets interpreted through the lens of that initial judgment. Kahneman tells a personal story that makes this vivid. Early in his career as a professor, he graded student essays the way most teachers do. He picked up one student's booklet, read all their essays in sequence, and assigned grades as he went. Then he moved on to the next student. One day he noticed something troubling. His grades within a single booklet were remarkably consistent. If the first essay was strong, the subsequent essays almost always received high marks too. If the first essay was weak, the rest suffered. He realized what was happening. The halo effect from the first essay was coloring his reading of everything that followed. A brilliant opening essay made him give the student the benefit of the doubt on every ambiguous sentence in the second essay. A poor opening essay made him read the same ambiguity as further evidence of weakness. He tested this suspicion by switching to a new method. Instead of grading one student's complete booklet at a time, he graded every student's answer to question 1 first, then every student's answer to question 2. He scored each answer without looking at his previous grades. The result was deeply uncomfortable. His grades for the same student now varied much more widely than before. A student who wrote a brilliant first essay might have written a mediocre second one, but under the old system, the halo from the first essay had hidden that inconsistency. The new method felt worse because it destroyed the illusion of coherence, but it was more accurate. The comfortable feeling of consistency had been a lie. This experience taught Kahneman a principle he would return to for decades. When you need to make multiple judgments about the same thing, keep the judgments independent. Do not let your impression from one contaminate the others. In a meeting, collect everyone's opinion privately before the discussion begins. In hiring, score each candidate on separate traits before forming a global impression. Decorrelate your errors, because when impressions flow freely from one judgment to the next, the halo effect makes everything feel coherent, and coherence feels like truth. The halo effect is one expression of a much broader principle that Kahneman considers among the most important in his entire book. He gave it an ungainly but unforgettable abbreviation, WISE IATE. What you see is all there is. Here is the idea. System 1 constructs the best possible story from whatever information is currently available. It does not search for information it does not have. It does not pause to consider what might be missing. It takes the scraps of evidence in front of it. A 5-minute conversation with Joan, a first essay, a confident voice, and weaves them into a complete, coherent picture. The picture feels convincing because System 1 is very good at making stories, but the quality of the story depends on the coherence of the available information, not on the amount or the quality of the evidence. This is worth pausing on. A story built on very little information can feel just as convincing, sometimes more convincing, than a story built on a mountain of evidence. In fact, less information often makes for a better story, because there are fewer contradictions to resolve. Kahneman puts it bluntly, knowing little makes it easier to fit everything you know into a coherent pattern. He demonstrated this with an experiment that sounds like a law school exercise. Subjects read background information about a legal dispute between a union worker and a store. Then different groups were exposed to different amounts of the lawyer's arguments. Some heard only one side, some heard both. You might expect that people who heard both sides would feel more confident. After all, they had more information. But the opposite happened. The participants who heard only one side were more confident in their verdict than those who heard both sides. Why? Because one-sided evidence makes a clean, coherent story. Two-sided evidence introduces doubt, contradiction, complexity, all things that System 1 despises. YSET helps explain an astonishing range of mental errors. Why are people overconfident? Because they build a coherent story from limited evidence and mistake the quality of the story for the quality of the evidence. Why do people neglect base rates? Because a vivid personality description is right in front of them and the statistical background is not. Why do people fall for first impressions? Because the initial information creates a story and all subsequent information gets absorbed into that story rather than challenging it. And why CIT is also the key to understanding something that might seem unrelated. The strange tendency of System 1 to answer questions it was never asked. Kahneman calls this substitution, and it is one of his most powerful insights. When you face a difficult question, how happy are you with your life? How popular will the president be in 6 months? How should financial criminals be punished? Your System 1 does not actually answer that question. It is too hard. Instead, System 1 finds a related question that is easier and answers that one instead. How happy are you with your life? Becomes what is my mood right now? How popular will the president be? Becomes how popular is the president today? Should I hire this person? Becomes do I like this person? The substitution happens silently. You do not feel yourself switching from the hard question to the easy one. You do not notice that the answer you produced does not actually address the question you were asked. You simply have an answer. It arrived quickly, it feels right, and you move on. This is the engine behind what Kahneman and Tversky called heuristics, mental shortcuts that simplify complex judgments. Heuristics are not random. They are not stupid. Most of the time, they work reasonably well, which is exactly why your brain uses them. But they produce systematic, predictable errors, and those errors are the subject of everything that comes next. Because once you understand that your mind routinely answers the wrong question, you start to see it everywhere. In your decisions about money, in your assessments of risk, in your judgments about people. The errors are hiding in plain sight, and they have names. Chapter 5. Anchors, Availability, and the Stories We Tell Ourselves. In the early 1970s, Kahneman and his collaborator, Amos Tversky, set up a rigged wheel of fortune. The wheel was marked from 0 to 100, but it was built so that it could only land on 2 numbers, 10 or 65. They brought students into a room, one group at a time. They spun the wheel. The students watched it land on either 10 or 65. Then Kahneman and Tversky asked 2 questions. First, is the percentage of African nations in the United Nations higher or lower than the number on the wheel? And second, what is your best estimate of that percentage? Now everyone in the room knew the wheel was random. The number it produced was completely meaningless. It had nothing to do with African nations or the United Nations or anything at all. It was a carnival game. It did not matter. The students who saw the wheel land on 10 guessed, on average, that 25% of UN nations were African. The students who saw the wheel land on 65 guessed 45%. A completely random, obviously irrelevant number shifted their estimates by 20 percentage points. This is the anchoring effect, and it is one of the most reliable findings in all of experimental psychology. When you encounter a number, any number, before making an estimate, that number pulls your subsequent guess toward it. The anchor does not have to be relevant. It does not have to be informative. It does not even have to be plausible. It just has to be on the table. But surely experienced professionals would be immune to something so transparent? Researchers tested this with real estate agents, people who price houses for a living. They gave the agents a comprehensive information packet about a house that was actually on the market, and they had the agents visit the property in person. Half the agents saw a listing price that was substantially higher than the true value. The other half saw a listing price that was substantially lower. After the tour, each agent was asked for her professional opinion. What was a reasonable buying price for this house? And what was the lowest price she would accept if she owned it? The anchoring effect was 41%. Agents who saw the high asking price gave estimates that were tens of thousands of dollars higher than agents who saw the low asking price. Their expert judgment, their years of training, their professional pride, none of it protected them. And here is the part that made Kahneman laugh. When asked what factors influenced their judgment, the agents listed many things: the neighborhood, the condition of the property, comparable sales. Not one of them mentioned the asking price. They insisted it had no effect on their thinking. They were completely wrong. The anchoring effect works because of 2 mechanisms, and Kahneman and Tversky spent years debating which one mattered more. One is deliberate adjustment. You start from the anchor and move away from it, but you do not move far enough because you stop as soon as you reach a number that feels plausible. The other is priming. The anchor activates information in your memory that is consistent with it. A high anchor for the price of a house makes you think of the house's best features. A low anchor makes its flaws come to mind. Either way, the practical implications are enormous. The first number on the table in any negotiation has a disproportionate influence on the outcome. The asking price of a house, the opening salary offer, the suggested retail price that makes the discount look generous. Supermarket shoppers in Sioux City, Iowa, encountered a sale on Campbell's soup. On some days, the sign above the display read, "Limit 12 per person." On other days, the sign simply read, "No limit per person." When the limit was in place, shoppers bought an average of 7 cans. When there was no limit, they bought 3. The number 12, a completely arbitrary restriction, served as an anchor and more than doubled the number of cans people dropped into their carts, and the anchoring effect extends into places where the stakes are infinitely higher than soup. German judges, experienced professionals with an average of more than 15 years on the bench, were given the description of a shoplifter and asked to determine an appropriate prison sentence. But first, each judge was asked to roll a pair of dice. The dice were loaded to land on either 3 or 9. Judges who rolled a 9 sentenced the shoplifter to an average of 8 months. Judges who rolled a 3 sentenced her to 5 months. The anchoring effect was 50%. A loaded die influenced how long a human being would spend in prison. If anchoring shows how a single number can warp your estimate of an unknown quantity, availability shows how the ease of remembering something can warp your estimate of how common it is. Here is a quick test. In a typical English text, does the letter K appear more often as the first letter of a word or as the third letter? Most people say first letter. The answer is third, but words that start with K, kitchen, king, kite, come to mind immediately. Words that have K as their third letter, like make, acknowledge, are much harder to retrieve. You answered the question not by consulting a database of letter frequencies in your mind, but by checking how easy it was to think of examples. Easy retrieval felt like high frequency. Kahneman calls this the availability heuristic. The psychologist Paul Slovic and his colleagues put this to a dramatic test. They gave people pairs of causes of death and asked which one was more common. The results were striking. 80% of respondents said accidental death was more likely than death from stroke. But strokes actually kill nearly twice as many people as all accidents combined. Tornadoes were judged more frequent than asthma, even though asthma kills 20 times more people. Death by lightning was considered less likely than death by botulism, when in fact lightning kills 52 times more people. The pattern is clear. Dramatic, vivid, newsworthy causes of death. Accidents, tornadoes, murders are massively overestimated. Quiet, common, unglamorous causes, strokes, asthma, diabetes, are underestimated. Your sense of how dangerous something is does not come from statistics. It comes from how easily a terrifying image springs to mind. This is why a single plane crash can make millions of people afraid to fly, even though flying remains astronomically safer than driving. The crash is vivid, it is dramatic, it dominates the news for days. The availability of the image overwhelms the actual probability of the event. Kahneman points out that the media does not just reflect our sense of what is dangerous, it helps create it. The topics that get covered are the topics that are dramatic and emotionally charged, which makes them more available in our memory, which makes them seem more frequent and more dangerous, which makes us demand more coverage. This self-reinforcing cycle has a name. The legal scholars Timur Kuran and Cass Sunstein called it an availability cascade. Terrorism is the ultimate example. The actual number of casualties from terrorist attacks, even in countries that are frequently targeted, is tiny compared to traffic deaths. But the images are seared into our memories. The emotional intensity is overwhelming, and the availability of those memories distorts our sense of risk so profoundly that we restructure our entire lives around a threat that, statistically, is less dangerous than the drive to the airport. Kahneman is honest about this. He describes visiting Israel during a period of bus bombings and noticing that he would instinctively avoid stopping next to a bus at red lights. He knew the statistics. He knew the risk was negligible. He knew he was more likely to be hurt in a car accident than by a bomb. But knowing did not help. System 1 does not consult statistics. It consults images, and the image of a burning bus was more powerful than any spreadsheet. Anchoring distorts your estimates by giving System 1 a starting number it cannot ignore. Availability distorts your sense of reality by making vivid, emotional events feel more common and more dangerous than they actually are. Both biases follow the same logic. System 1 uses the information that is easiest to reach, not the information that is most accurate. And System 2, which could in theory catch the error, is usually too lazy or too busy to intervene. But we are not done. There is one more family of errors that Kahneman considers perhaps the most dangerous of all. It is the tendency to see patterns that are not there, to match people to stereotypes, and to confuse a good story with a true one. Kahneman calls it representativeness, and it will make you question every judgment you have ever made about another human being. Chapter 6. The Representativeness Trap. Here is a description of a man named Tom W., written by a psychologist based on personality tests Tom took in high school. Tom W. is of high intelligence, although lacking in true creativity. He has a need for order and clarity, and for neat and tidy systems in which every detail finds its appropriate place. His writing is rather dull and mechanical, occasionally enlivened by somewhat corny puns and flashes of imagination of the sci-fi type. He has a strong drive for competence. He seems to have little feel and little sympathy for other people, and does not enjoy interacting with others. Self-centered, he nonetheless has a deep moral sense. Tom is now a graduate student. What do you think he is studying? Humanities? Social work? Law? Computer science? If you are like almost everyone who has ever been given this test, your mind immediately sorted through the options and landed on computer science, or maybe engineering. The description screams nerd, the corny puns, the love of order, the science fiction imagination, the discomfort with people. It is a perfect match for the stereotype of a computer science student, and that is precisely the problem. When Kahneman and Tversky gave this test to graduate students in psychology, people who had taken multiple courses in statistics, the results were identical to everyone else's. They ranked the fields by how well the description matched the stereotype of a typical student in each field. Computer science at the top, humanities and social work at the bottom. But think about what they ignored. At any large university, the number of students in humanities and education dwarfs the number in computer science. If you picked a graduate student at random, the odds that he is studying humanities are many times higher than the odds that he is in computer science. This is what statisticians call the base rate, the background frequency of each category. The students knew this. They walked past those enormous lecture halls every day. If you had asked them, without showing them the description of Tom W., which field a random graduate student was most likely to be studying, they would have correctly said humanities or social work. The base rate would have guided their answer, but the moment they saw that personality sketch, the base rate vanished. A vivid, detailed story overwrote the statistical reality. The description was so compelling, so coherent, so perfectly matched to a stereotype that it made the numbers invisible. This is the representativeness heuristic. When you are asked how likely it is that a person belongs to a particular category, you do not calculate probabilities. You do not consult base rates. You check how well the person matches your mental image of that category. The better the match, the higher the probability feels, and the actual frequency of the category is treated as if it does not exist. But Kahneman was not done. He wanted to push this even further. He wanted to know what happens when representativeness collides head-on with basic logic, not just statistics that people might reasonably overlook, but the simplest rule of probability that any rational person should recognize. He and Tversky created a woman named Linda. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Now, which is more probable? Option A. Linda is a bank teller. Option B. Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Take a moment with that. Really think about your answer before I continue. If you chose option B, you are in the vast majority. In Kahneman's original study, 85% of respondents, including doctoral students in the decision science program at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, all of whom had taken advanced courses in probability and statistics, chose B, and every single one of them was wrong. Here is why. Think about it visually. The set of all bank tellers is a big circle. Inside that circle, there is a smaller circle, the bank tellers who are also active feminists. Every feminist bank teller is a bank teller, so the probability of Linda being a feminist bank teller can never be higher than the probability of Linda being a bank teller. It is logically impossible. Adding a detail to a description can only make it less probable, not more. So why does almost everyone get this wrong? Because Linda sounds like a feminist. The description is a perfect match, and System 1 does not evaluate probability, it evaluates resemblance. Option B tells a more coherent story. It feels more right, and the feeling of rightness is so powerful that it overrides a logical rule that, when stated plainly, every one of those Stanford PhD students would have recognized immediately. Kahneman and Tversky called this the conjunction fallacy, the mistaken belief that a specific, detailed scenario is more likely than a broader one that contains it. And the naturalist Stephen Jay Gould, who was fully aware of the logic, described his own experience with it beautifully. He said that a little voice in his head kept jumping up and down, shouting, "But she cannot just be a bank teller, read the description." The voice is System 1, and it does not care about logic. The Linda problem became one of the most famous experiments in all of psychology. It also became one of the most controversial. Critics argued that people might have interpreted probable as plausible or typical, rather than in the strict mathematical sense. Kahneman acknowledged this, but he pointed out that the deeper finding was not really about one word. It was about a fundamental feature of how the human mind works. We judge the world by the quality of its stories, not by the probability of its outcomes. Michael Lewis captured this same idea in his book Moneyball. For decades, professional baseball scouts evaluated players by how well they looked the part. A pitcher who was tall, athletic, and handsome was rated higher than one who was short and awkward, even if the awkward pitcher had better statistics. The Oakland Athletics upended the system by ignoring what players looked like and focusing exclusively on what the numbers said. They built a winning team from players that other teams had rejected because they did not match the stereotype. The scouts were using representativeness. They were judging players by resemblance to a prototype, the mental image of what a great baseball player should look like. The numbers told a different story, but the numbers were not vivid, not coherent, and not satisfying to System 1. So the numbers lost. Kahneman offers a simple prescription for anyone who wants to avoid the representativeness trap. When you are making a prediction about an individual, start with the base rate, the overall frequency of the outcome you are predicting. Then ask yourself how strong your evidence really is. If the evidence is powerful and reliable, let it move your estimate away from the base rate. But if it is thin, anecdotal, or based on a personality sketch from high school, stay close to the base rate and resist the seductive pull of a good story. The world is full of people who look like computer scientists but study poetry, who look like bank tellers but march in protests, and who look like failed athletes but throw a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. Representativeness tells you the story feels right. Base rates tell you the story is probably wrong. Learning to hear both voices and to trust the quiet one is one of the most valuable skills you will ever develop. Chapter 7. The Hidden Pattern That Fools Everyone. Kahneman describes a moment that he calls one of the most satisfying discoveries of his career. And it did not happen in a laboratory. It happened in a classroom, with a room full of Israeli Air Force flight instructors. He had been invited to lecture them on the psychology of effective training. He explained a well-established principle that rewarding good behavior is more effective than punishing mistakes. The research was clear. Pigeons, rats, children, adults, across every species and every setting, positive reinforcement works better than punishment. When he finished, one of the most experienced instructors in the room raised his hand. He was respectful but firm. With all due respect, the instructor said, "What you are saying does not match what I have observed. When I praise a cadet for a clean execution of a maneuver, the next time he tries it, he almost always does worse. When I scream at a cadet for a terrible execution, the next time he tries it, he almost always does better. So do not tell me that reward works and punishment does not. The opposite is true." Kahneman paused, and then he realized something. The instructor was right about the facts. He was completely wrong about the explanation. Here is what was actually happening. When an instructor praised a cadet, it was because the cadet had just performed exceptionally well, far better than his average. But exceptional performances, by definition, are partly a matter of luck. Good conditions, a favorable gust of wind, a moment of unusual focus, these are temporary. The next time the cadet flies, his performance is likely to drift back toward his average, not because the praise hurt him, but because extraordinary performances do not usually repeat. The same logic applies in reverse. When the instructor screamed at a cadet, it was because the cadet had just performed terribly, far worse than his average. But terrible performances are also partly luck. The next attempt is likely to be closer to the average, not because the screaming helped, but because extreme performances naturally regress. This is regression to the mean, and it is one of the most important and most misunderstood phenomena in all of statistics. Whenever two measurements are imperfectly correlated, and almost everything in life is imperfectly correlated, extreme results on one measurement will tend to be followed by less extreme results on the next. Kahneman needed to demonstrate this without algebra, so he improvised. He drew a target on the floor with chalk and asked every officer in the room to turn his back to the target and toss 2 coins at it, one after the other. They measured the distances. Then they wrote the results on a blackboard, sorted from best to worst on the first throw. The pattern was immediate and obvious. Most of those who had done best on the first throw did worse on the second. Most of those who had done worst on the first throw improved. No praise, no punishment. Just the inevitable tendency of random variation to pull extreme results back toward the average. The room went quiet. The instructors understood. They had spent their careers trapped in an illusion. Because they praised good performance and criticized bad performance, they were constantly observing a pattern. Praise seemed to cause decline, and criticism seemed to cause improvement. But the pattern had nothing to do with their behavior. It was a mathematical certainty that would have appeared even if they had said nothing at all. Kahneman calls this one of the most tragic contingencies of the human condition. Because we naturally reward success and punish failure, and because success tends to be followed by regression and failure tends to be followed by improvement, we are statistically destined to conclude that punishment works and reward does not. Life itself is set up to teach us the wrong lesson. Does failing to understand regression only affect individuals and their gut feelings? What happens when entire institutions with billion-dollar budgets make the same mistake? Think about the famous Sports Illustrated jinx, the widespread belief that an athlete whose picture appears on the cover of the magazine will perform terribly the following season. People have invented elaborate explanations for this. Overconfidence, pressure, distraction from the spotlight. The real explanation is much simpler. An athlete only appears on the cover after a spectacular season, a season in which everything went right, including a healthy dose of luck. The following season, that luck is unlikely to repeat. Performance regresses toward the mean. The cover did not cause the decline. The cover was a symptom of the exceptional performance that made a decline almost inevitable, and the consequences of failing to understand regression extend far beyond sports. Kahneman describes a stunning example that cost over $1 billion. The Gates Foundation invested heavily in the creation of small schools, after research appeared to show that the highest performing schools in America were disproportionately small. It seemed obvious. Small schools must be better, more personal attention, stronger community, more engaged teachers. But here is the fact that nobody noticed. The worst performing schools in America were also disproportionately small. Small schools appear at both extremes because extreme results are more likely in small samples. Flip a coin 4 times and you might get all heads. Flip it 400 times and you will get very close to 50-50. The same principle applies to schools. Small schools are not better or worse on average. They are just more variable. The patterns that launched a $1 billion initiative were artifacts of sample size, not evidence of educational excellence. Regression to the mean was first identified over 100 years ago by Sir Francis Galton, one of the great minds of Victorian science. He discovered it while studying the heights of parents and children. Tall parents tend to have children who are shorter than they are. Short parents tend to have children who are taller, not because of any mysterious force, simply because height is influenced by many factors, and an extreme combination of those factors in one generation is unlikely to repeat exactly in the next. Yet despite being discovered over a century ago, despite being mathematically straightforward, despite being taught in every introductory statistics course, regression to the mean remains one of the most counterintuitive ideas in all of science. And the reason is simple. Our minds are built for stories, not statistics. When a student performs brilliantly and then declines, we want to know why. When a company dominates its industry and then stumbles, we search for the decision that caused the fall. We want causation. We need causation. System 1 demands it, but regression to the mean is not caused by anything. That is its deepest lesson, and the reason it is so hard to accept. Sometimes things just drift back toward average, because luck is temporary, because extreme conditions do not persist, and because the world is more random than any of us want to believe. And that randomness, our refusal to see it, our insistence on replacing it with stories, is the thread that ties every chapter of this book together. Key takeaways. What your two minds are trying to tell you. We have covered an enormous amount of ground, and if your head is spinning a little right now, that is actually a good sign. It means your system 2 is working. So let me slow down and pull together the ideas that matter most. The first and most fundamental lesson of this book is that you are not one mind, you are two. System 1 is fast, automatic, intuitive, and always on. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical, and chronically lazy. You identify with System 2. You think of yourself as the conscious, reasoning person who weighs evidence and makes careful choices. But that is an illusion. Most of your judgments, beliefs, impressions, and decisions originate in System 1, and System 2 rubber stamps them without checking the math. The second lesson is that the errors System 1 makes are not random. They are systematic, they are predictable, and they have names: anchoring, availability, representativeness, the halo effect, WYSITE, the conjunction fallacy, regression to the mean. These are not exotic phenomena that happen to other people in laboratory experiments. These are the invisible grooves in which your thinking runs every single day. So what do you actually do with this knowledge? Here is where Kahneman is refreshingly honest. He does not promise you can fix yourself. After decades of studying these biases, he admits that his own intuitions are just as flawed as anyone else's. He still feels the pull of anchors. He still overweights vivid stories. He still mistakes cognitive ease for truth. The difference is that he has learned to recognize the situations where mistakes are likely, and that is the real takeaway. Not self-correction, but self-awareness. You cannot rewire System 1. It is too fast, too automatic, too deeply embedded in the architecture of your brain. But you can learn to slow down at the moments that matter. You can learn to recognize the warning signs. When a number has been placed on the table before a negotiation, stop. You are being anchored. Ask yourself what your estimate would be if that number had never been mentioned. When something feels true because it is familiar, stop. Repetition is not evidence. Cognitive ease is not proof. Ask yourself whether you believe the claim because it is supported by logic and data, or because you have simply heard it many times. When a person matches your mental image of a category so perfectly that the conclusion feels obvious, stop. You are in the grip of representativeness. Ask yourself about the base rate. How common is the outcome you are predicting? Is your evidence strong enough to override those odds? When an extraordinary success is followed by a decline, or a terrible failure is followed by an improvement, stop before you assign credit or blame. It might just be regression to the mean. The coach who changed the lineup, the new CEO who took over after a bad year, the doctor who prescribed a remedy right before the patient improved. They might deserve no credit at all. Luck was probably the main ingredient, and extreme luck does not last. When you feel absolutely certain about a judgment, and you cannot imagine being wrong, that is precisely the moment to be most suspicious. Confidence is not a reliable signal of accuracy. Confidence is a feeling generated by System 1 that reflects the coherence of the story you have constructed, not the quality of the evidence behind it. The less you know, the easier it is to build a coherent story. The easier it is to build a coherent story, the more confident you feel. This means that the people who know the least are often the most sure of themselves. And perhaps the most practical lesson of all is this: the biases Kahneman describes are far easier to spot in other people than in yourself. You will read about the halo effect and immediately think of your boss, your colleague, your neighbor. You will not naturally turn the lens inward. This is why Kahneman says the real value of learning about cognitive biases is not private self-improvement. It is better conversations, a richer vocabulary for talking about judgment and choice, the ability to say to a colleague, "I think we are anchored on last year's numbers," or "Are we sure this is not just availability bias from that news story last week?" Organizations that develop this vocabulary make better decisions. Teams that encourage the question, "What are we missing?" rather than "What do we know?" protect themselves against wisayati. Leaders who ask for independent opinions before opening the floor to discussion prevent the halo effect from cascading through the room. Kahneman is not trying to make you cynical about your own mind. System 1 is extraordinary. It is the reason you can read, drive, detect a lie, fall in love, and catch a ball without conscious calculation. The vast majority of what it does is not just adequate, it is remarkable. The point is not that your intuitions are always wrong. The point is that they are never worth trusting blindly, and we have only covered half the story. Everything we have talked about today, the two systems, the heuristics, the biases, is the foundation. It explains how your mind works. Part 2 of Thinking, Fast and Slow, explains what happens when these mental patterns collide with the real world, with money, with risk, with the choices that shape your life and your happiness. In Part 2, Kahneman will show you why experts are almost always overconfident and why their predictions are barely better than random guessing. He will explain why losing $100 hurts roughly twice as much as winning $100 feels good, and how that single fact about your brain warps nearly every financial and personal decision you make. He will reveal the disturbing truth that there are two versions of you: an experiencing self who lives your life, and a remembering self who judges it, and they disagree about what makes you happy. If part 1 makes you question how you think, part 2 will make you question how you choose, how you feel, and whether you even know what you want. But for now, let me leave you with the image that started this conversation: a bat and a ball, $1.10, an answer that felt so right, so obvious, so effortless that you did not think to question it. That tiny moment, the moment where a confident intuition silently replaced careful thinking, is happening inside your head hundreds of times a day, on questions far more important than the price of a ball. You cannot stop it. But now, at least, you know it is there. So here is my question for you. Over the last hour, was there a specific bias or mental shortcut that made you think of a decision you have made recently? Something you might have gotten wrong without realizing it? I would genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. The more specific, the better. Not "I make bad decisions sometimes," but the particular moment when you recognized one of these patterns in your own life. Those stories are how we actually learn this material, not from hearing about it in the abstract, but from catching it in the wild. If you want to go even deeper into Kahneman's ideas, I strongly recommend picking up a copy of Thinking, Fast and Slow. There are dozens of experiments and studies that I could not fit into this video, and reading them is an experience in itself. Kahneman designs each chapter so that you experience the bias before he explains it. There is a link to the book on Amazon and Audible in the description below. It is one of those rare books that genuinely changes the way you see the world, and I think you will love it. Part 2 of this deep dive is on the channel now. It covers everything we did not get to today: overconfidence, prospect theory, loss aversion, framing effects, and the two selves. If this first part shifted how you think about your own mind, part 2 will shift how you think about your choices and your happiness. If this is your first time here, this channel is called One Book Away, and what we do is take the most powerful books ever written and walk through every key idea. No fluff, no filler, just the ideas that can change your life. Subscribe so you do not miss part 2, and I will see you there.